conducted a study to better understand how individuals relate to and connect with the environment around them. We were particularly interested in how political affiliation affects the attitudes around climate change and people's willingness to change daily activities in order to become more climate conscious. We included questions regarding the prevalence and importance of climate change, as well as the ensuing effects on global life. We also asked questions about the importance and role of the government in environmental issues and policies. Questions about emotional connection to the environment and individual impact on climate change were also included in this survey. Understanding individual views on climate change is essential. Climate change is extremely relevant in today's society, and the effects can be seen around the world. Melting ice caps, wildfires, and other extreme natural disasters, droughts, warming of global temperatures, rising in sea levels, and loss of biodiversity can all be attributed to climate change. In order to create meaningful change in policies to combat climate change, it is integral that we understand the factors that influence these beliefs.
Our survey, which we titled Personal Connection to Climate Change, was designed to measure a participant's attitude towards climate change in the environment. We included several sections in the survey, each aimed at a different aspect of climate change. These sections included emotional connection to climate change, impact of climate change on global life, environmentalism through government and politics, the level of impact an individual has on the environment, and willingness to change. There was also a section that recorded demographic questions and data. In total, our survey was made up of about 45 questions, not including the demographic questions. The questions were formatted in statements so that the participant only had to indicate their level of agreement with them, ranging from 1 to 10, with 1 being strongly disagree and 10 being strongly agree. We thought that the survey took between 5 and 10 minutes to complete. Our group originally began sending out this survey to just our friends and family. This resulted in only about 30 responses among the 5 of us. In order for our results to be reliable as possible, we decided that we needed more participants. Our goal was to get approximately 80 to 90 participants, or roughly double the amount of questions in our survey. To achieve this, we posted our survey to a UVM Facebook page for any UVM student to take. This allowed us to receive 154 participants in our environmental survey, surpassing our original goal by about 60 responses. We didn't add a feedback section on our survey, but a few participants did reach out on their own to let us know some of their thoughts on it. One participant thought that it was too long and contained too many questions, making it hard to stay focused and engaged the entire time. Another participant suggested that we should have included a section on animal agriculture, since, in their words, it is the single largest source of human greenhouse gases, deforestation, water and air pollution, and biodiversity loss.
Hi, I'm Tristan, and I'm going to be describing the findings and interpretations of our survey. For our survey, responses were collected from 146 individuals of various ages, race and ethnicities, nationalities, and political affiliations. To summarize the demographic statistics that Olivia described, graphs such as pie charts would portray these best. In addition, the Spearman-Rho correlation coefficient, the Pearson coefficient, and the Cronbach's alpha of our survey was calculated. For our survey, a higher score was equated to a greater emotional connection to the environment, while a lower score indicated the opposite. First, the Spearman-Rho correlation coefficient. This was calculated for both gender identity and political affiliation, and these two measures were used to measure the correlation between that and themselves and a higher score. For gender identity, the result was a correlation coefficient of 0.351 with a p-value of less than 0.05, and for political affiliation, a correlation coefficient of negative 0.001 was calculated with a p-value of 0.991. For this specific test statistic, correlation is significant at the 0.001 level. Therefore, the correlation for gender identity was not significant, while the correlation for political affiliation was. Furthermore, the Pearson coefficient was calculated to indicate the strength of the correlation between an individual's age and how high of a score they attained. An R value of 0.053 was calculated, which indicates that there is a moderate, substantial, positive correlation between these two variables. And finally, the Cronbach's alpha. This was calculated to measure the level of internal consistency of our survey. A Cronbach's alpha value, of 0.890 was calculated for a total of 46 items. This indicates that all of the questions in the survey measured and evaluated our construct entirely and that there were no odd questions. This Cronbach's alpha value can be regarded as questionable because it is essentially saying that our test has an internal consistency of almost 100%. To further address this problem, more tests of reliability, such as alternate forms, will be conducted to get a deeper perspective and determine whether this is the actual truth. Conclusively, some feedback we got about the survey from the respondents were that one, it was long and tiring due to our numerous amount of questions, and two, some wondered why we were measuring emotional connection to the environment when our class is centered around speech-language pathology. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. My name is Keelan and I would like to discuss with you some possible ideas about improving the psychometric adequacy of our test. One area we could start with is face validity, which we can measure by asking a polling question at the very end of our test on a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you feel like our test is measuring our construct of emotional perception of climate change? This would allow us to see if the respondents felt like the survey was professional, legit, and valid, and if they said yes, it would mean that they're taking the test seriously or as seriously as they want to. Another area that we should focus on is content validity, which is how well the test items cover the various aspects of our construct, which is the purpose of the actual test. So, in order to assure this, we could get a panel of experts. It would be nice to have Greta Thunberg, but it might be a little bit easier and more effective to get a panel of maybe 10 or 15 university professors studying the environment, and they could meet on Zoom, discuss our questions, and we could synthesize their findings. My second idea would be to better our validity by finding concurrent validity, which is finding validation of accuracy through comparisons to other accredited measures, surveys, or tests. My group could compare the results of our survey on emotional perception of climate change to a 2020 Yale survey on climate opinion, perhaps. That survey assessed the entire country, subdivided by counties. And while our research had many fewer participants and much less diversity in demographics, our questions were still highly similar, and there was a similar number of questions as well. In this way, we could see how well our slightly unorganized sample actually represented the opinion of the entire United States, and if our similar questions got similar data. My third and final idea is to see if we could hone in the test to see if a shorter test could provide us with similar results. We could start by doing this with a factor analysis test, which would subdivide the test into the various groups that it thought which questions provided similar results, and we could look at that and see if within those groups any questions repeated themselves and seemed unnecessary, so we could remove them. We could also look at this with our Cronbach's alpha results, which we could see which questions had the same Cronbach's alpha, and we could see if those questions were actually related or if it was just spurious, and then we could remove whichever ones we chose. And a final way to find this is to ask the panel of experts that we initially had, how often do our questions seem to repeat themselves? Thank you. All right, take it away, Olivia.
Hi everyone, I'm Olivia. I'm going to discuss issues of cultural and linguistic diversity in our survey. First, I'll address what inclusive surveys should be conscious of. When creating demographic questions that involve sexual orientation and gender identity, we should be considerate of each respondent's experience from many perspectives. To do this, we've included fill-in-the-blank options and the option to write NA to give respondents the power to write in their own answers and to allow them to be seen. It's important to consider that other nationalities and cultures may interpret questions and answers differently. Inclusive language and thinking about the context, history, and implications of environmental issues is important when improving a survey's reach. So the first demographic was age. We saw a range of ages from 18 to 60 with a mean age of 31.62 with a standard deviation of 16.46 years. Out of the 149 respondents to age, 51.7% of our survey participants were between the ages of 20 and 22, with the highest percentage being age 21. While we did see a large range of ages, it is clear that this survey is most representative of people in their early 20s and least representative of children, older adults, and the elderly. So the next demographic was race and ethnicity. So out of 152 responses to race and ethnicity, 65.1% of our survey participants identified as white, 30.9% identified as Black or African American, 2.6% identified as Asian, and 1.3% identified as Hispanic or Latino. This indicates that our survey would be least appropriate when considering Asian and Hispanic or Latino populations. While white was the most prevalent race, responses to this survey are most representative of this population. And the survey could do better at improving its representativeness of Black and African American populations, as well as other populations around the world, by making it more accessible to other areas of the world and the United States. And for the gender demographic, our survey participants were mostly female, which consisted of 61.4% of the participants, while 36.6% identified as male and 2% identified as non-binary. This indicates that the survey was mostly representative of female views. For political affiliation, we saw a slight range of political affiliations where 28.9% indicated that they were overwhelmingly liberal, 38.3% were leaning towards liberal, 24.8% were moderate, 7.4% were leaning towards conservative, and 7% were, 0.7% were overwhelmingly conservative. I think we only had one response that was overwhelmingly conservative. And we definitely had more participants on the liberal side of the spectrum, and this is important to consider when we look at any significant differences in our analyses comparing views on climate change and political affiliation. Lastly, we looked at nationality. This survey did a good job at reaching many nationalities, but the percentage of Americans was still the most substantial of participants. Americans made up nearly 50% of responses, and Bahamians made up 23.3% of responses. We did receive a low percentage of responses from other nationalities, including Canadian, Chinese, Guyanese, Kenyan, and Polish. So some issues to consider are that this survey was mainly targeted towards college students in the United States, and for that reason, this survey mostly represents the college student population. This survey mainly went around through word of mouth from college students and the use of social media like Facebook, which might explain this disproportion in age. It's important to consider that other nationalities and cultures may interpret questions and answers differently, so inclusive language and thinking about the context is important when improving a survey's reach. So if the language and wording of the questions were more accessible to many nationalities and cultures, it would allow everyone to feel included and heard. So another way to improve accessibility is to make sure the wording of the questions is concise and consistent. So with our survey, we stuck to a 10-point scale throughout, and each question was worded as a statement in which the respondent would strongly agree or strongly disagree. So for example, we would write, I recycle often, and then they would respond, strongly disagree or strongly agree. And we didn't stray from this format. So ways to improve. So in order to improve the diversity of respondents, other platforms could be used to get the survey around. So for those who don't use social media, the survey could be posted as a written survey in various public places or as a telephone survey. It's likely to reach a lot more people when it's accessible through various platforms. And our survey was mainly geared towards those who were comfortable with standard English. So it would also improve the survey's accessibility if other languages like Spanish were included. So lastly, the use of inclusive language that is accessible to many nationalities and cultures is important when improving the diversity. So a way to facilitate this is to rely on expert resources for how to phrase certain questions and how to target a construct. So that's it for linguistic diversity. Next, we'll look at measuring psychometric adequacy. Thank you.